and they are violating that.
Mm-hmm.
They are violating that provision of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I thought it was necessary for me, as being one of the signatories to the Charter, to really highlight the fact of what the federal government is doing and how wrong it is.
Mm-hmm. Good answer. And how is the case going? Is there any updates as of May 2nd?
Yes, sure. The update as of the last couple of days, on Friday, I guess, is that the case is proceeding. It's in the court. It's all been registered, and the lawyers have all been identified for both sides. And both sides have been submitting their various briefs to the judge. And each side gets an opportunity to cross-examine the other's briefs. And that's what's happening right now, sort of called case management. And that will go on because it'll be in between time for each side to study the documents or cross-examination of the other. That will go on quite likely till the end of July.
Okay.
And then there will be a pause, and we're looking at hoping to get a date for the public hearing in September.
Oh, good.
And that would be looks like a 4-day hearing where all of the summaries come together from all the work that had been done for the last few months and heard before a judge, and it will be, more public. And then the judge, we anticipate, hopefully will have a decision by Christmas.
Oh, great. And then it would proceed a decision, or the trial would proceed on Christmas?
But that would be the decision. And then I guess whichever side loses is highly likely to appeal it to the Supreme Court of Canada, and that will be next year.
Oh, great. Okay. So it's moving along quite nicely.
Yes.
So how do you feel about the PPC party?
Well, I joined them now before the last election and campaigned for them in my area here on Vancouver Island. So to me, they're the only party available on the federal scene today. It speaks to me. They're the only party, by the way, that has their expenses and their financial statements on their website. The Liberals, the Conservatives, the Greens, the NDP, none of them have will even show how they're spending the money.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that really strange. So I just lost faith in the Conservative Party of Canada back a few years ago, tried to contact them, tried to see what they were doing. Then they, their positions would change almost weekly on a given issue. And so I just couldn't take that anymore. So I had to quit and leave, and which I did. And around the same time, of course, I had been following Mr. Bernier and the PC party. And then I joined them. And then I went to hear Mr. Bernier speak a few times when he was here in British Columbia. And that only reinforced my view that I was right in choosing the party. And so I've been a member ever since, and trying to do my part in preaching the gospel according to the People's Party of Canada.
Sounds great. How did the association Taking Back Our Freedom, or the TBOF.ca, how did you come to, you're a board member, right? Did you start that? Are you on the board? How did that kind of happen?
Yeah, that happened. That happened as a result of a number of people in Alberta who had got very concerned about what was going on and started to formulate this kind of organization, and then called me and asked me what I would like to be part of it. And I said, yeah, I think we really need something like your organization. And so they asked me to go chairman of the board, which I did. And so that's really up and running right now. And we've got a lot of great doctors on our board of advisors, a lot of great business people and community people on our board of directors. And it's been very active and getting more active every day. So that's how I got involved with the Taking Back Our Freedoms. I'm also with Veterans for Freedoms.
Okay.
And they were just on Parliament Hill this last weekend.
All right. Yeah.
At the War Memorial. And I'm a sort of an honorary patron to that organization as well. And I really enjoy doing these kinds of things. And with the veterans, I had a great uncle that served in the First World War at Gallipoli. And I have a brother who's still alive. He's just 2 years younger than me, who served in the Canadian Guards. They're not around anymore now, of the Canadian Army, and actually served with the United Nations through the Canadian Guards, in Cyprus years ago when it was a real hotspot for the United Nations. And so my family and my history has some connection to a number of the conflicts over the last 100 years. And so I'm very pleased to be able to serve the veterans as well as to the larger audience through the Take Back Our Freedoms.
Yeah. Here's something I've never heard you talk about. I'm just trying to formulate it in a way that's the most respectful. Is it Canadian? Some have said, I don't agree with it, but some have said that the American Constitution is has more freedoms or it's more bulletproof than the Canadian Constitution. Do you think that's true?
Well, if you look at it today, the whole American and Canadian system developed differently. That's the first thing to know. Second thing to know is that they had a Bill of Rights 15 years after they became a country. We were 114 years. So it's a big difference in the history and culture of both places. Their court system works faster than ours, and they've been able to get decisions. Yeah. The predicament that Canada is in is that there was only a couple of lower courts that ruled as it relates to the pandemic or the mandates under the pandemic. We don't know the final adjudication. Whereas in the United States, they got some early decisions right from the Supreme Court against, for example, some of the president's mandates. So they were able to move through their highest court quicker than we did. So it's not necessarily a question of having more freedoms. They've had them longer than we have. They have a culture of it. Yeah. And so therefore, they have a system developed which is much quicker than ours. Ours is only 40 years old. And so that's the difference, the age and the experience that they have in litigating these things is much more efficient than ours has been or is at the present moment. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we still don't know how the courts are going to adjudicate at the highest level. And that's why, of course, I'm in court and others. So it's very, very different in the United States. And they have a different court system than we do of appeal courts in the states and then to the Supreme Court of the United States. So not necessarily more freedoms. It's a question of how late we were in getting them compared to the United States and how our system works. And it looks at this point that our system doesn't work as fast on these kinds of issues as they do in the United States. At the end of the day, we'll see where we stand. Is it I guess you can't answer on that. It's not by design, or it's just kind of how things are structured? It's to how things are structured. Yeah. Okay. And the fact that we didn't, from 1867, when we became a country, we didn't have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms for that 114 years until 1981. In the United States, 1776 and 1791, they had a Bill of Rights. So they've had a couple of centuries dealing with this, and we've had 4 decades. So the history tells you a lot about that. Yeah, kind of seems, maybe this is perception, but kind of seems the Commonwealth countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, have really, really pushed the bounds of democracy. And in America has too. It seems on purpose, kind of. Well, we came out of a different system. Our whole system in the Commonwealth, because we didn't have a revolution, we never left England, right? We didn't have a revolution and a war, whereas the Americans did. So we eased out of a colonial circumstance with the full cooperation of the colonial country. They didn't. They fought a war over it. So that's a huge, big difference. The other thing is that because they severed all ties and had a war over it, they started from scratch, whereas we brought with us British common law. So British common law, unwritten, is that's where our Charter of Rights and Freedoms was. It wasn't written down. And because it wasn't written down, therefore, it was subject to a lot of the whims and stuff of the various courts over the centuries. So it's a whole different system of looking at how rights and freedoms are going to be guaranteed, right? One is unwritten common law. The other was a written Bill of Rights. And so a lot of what's happening in the United States follows that history. Right. Do you think the Americans
have more checks and balances in their system, or just the speed of efficiency?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at and how it's exercised, I mean, if you look at the United States and 50 states, there's really only about 20 or 25 states that have really actively stood up for rights and freedoms and their Bill of Rights. Right. The other 25 have not, or 20 have not. And so if you look at New York and California, they're just like it is in Canada. And they're two of the biggest states in the union. So, but Ron DeSantis of Florida has exercised all of the levers that he has at his disposal to fight this. We don't have a premier who's done that. But premiers could have. They could have taken their mandates to their highest court and asked for a constitutional adjudication. They didn't do that. Right. So I think it would be a better way to phrase it would be, it seems like they have stronger regional and state leaders in the United States on this issue in particular than we do in Canada.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes down to leadership.
Yeah. DeSantis is great. So you're setting a great example that we all really love, putting your money where your mouth is, going for it, and even 20 years in retirement, coming back and battling against the son of the leader that you were battling back in the 80s. I want to keep everything respectful, like you always do, which I find a very good example. So what can people, average freedom-loving Albertans, what can they do to help the cause of freedom?
Well, I think they've got to make up their minds, like you and I have, about a party, and that's very important, and go out and that. And we know what the PPC stands for, and they do stand for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I mean, our leader went to jail over the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And what other leader has stood up for freedom like our leader has? Nobody has. Yeah. So that's number one. And number two, then, there are many other organizations that you could join, like Take Back Our Freedoms that we just spoke about, like Action for Canada, which is all over Canada. They're a good organization, and they're fighting to try to protect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And there are many, many others as well. There's Vaccine Choice, there's Take Action Canada, there's the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, and there are a number in Alberta. So, so we go out and look for the organization that defends our rights and freedoms and join it and get involved. And then, of course, the other thing you can do is to make sure you make representation to your MLAs and to your MPs in writing. The email is not always the best source of getting through to these people. Right. As a matter of fact, snail mail might be better, writing a letter and putting it in the post office, because that's physical. They can always push on a delete button on their computer and eliminate your email and tell you, oh, I made a mistake, or our computer broke down. But when the post office, if you could keep a copy of your letter, put the other one in the mail to your MLA and to your MP, and get their addresses, that will be received at the where their offices are, has to be opened, and it has to be counted. And so you may have a better chance if you don't know your MLA, if you don't know your MP, to do that, to make representation in writing through just a simple letter. The other thing is you could try to get a meeting with these people, or a group of you could, and just put it right to them. Why aren't you defending the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? So those are the kinds of things Canadians can do. And because some of the mandates are lifted, we hear of every day. I mean, my inbox, of course, is full every hour. Right. And I got a job to keep up. As a matter of fact, I'm behind by a couple of hundred right now since yesterday. Yeah. So, but, there are still some mandates in place, like the travel one. There are still employers out there who are demanding that everybody be vaccinated before they would give them a job. Right. And there are a lot of people who have died because of delayed surgeries. Mm-hmm. And so my argument is that all of the governments of Canada, all 14 of them, 3 territories, the 10 provinces, the federal government, all have got to be brought to justice on this. We don't let this just fall by the wayside because some of the mandates are over. They were on long enough to see a lot of people killed and a lot of people injured permanently and a lot of other people injured badly. And so we must correct those abuses that have gone on for the last 2 years. They're still abuses, and just because the mandate is over doesn't make them any less. The person still died and still won't be back with us anymore. So I think we have an obligation as a citizen of the country to ensure that the justice is served here and that our governments are held to account. That's a big job, but I think it has to be done.
So where do you go to recharge your batteries? I know you've got a full plates and you're working more than full time and doing the interviews. How do you remain positive?
Well, up until a few weeks ago, the weather wasn't all that well, but besides which, I try to get out for a walk every day when I'm home if I can. Sometimes I can't because I just get too busy with Zoom calls and it's too late or whatever.
Right.
And I'm back biking again. I've been biking for the last number of years, and I'll just try to steal an hour somewhere in the day and go for an hour's bike ride.
Right.
And I did that today. It's one of the first days I've done it now for a while. And so I try to do that if I can. Of course, I try to break up time for reading as well. I want to keep up to date on everything that's going on. So when I do interviews like that, I'm current. Right. So it's a pretty full day. And now I'm also a big baseball fan. And so, you know, I love I was a baseball player years ago. I love baseball. Of course, the Stanley Cup playoffs are on as well. Right. And I'm a sports fan. So I don't get a chance to watch my sports like I used to. But yeah, what I do now is really try to get out on my bike every day.
It's good. You're what, Newfoundland, but you're BC, so you must be either Maple Leafs or Canucks.
I'm more of a Canucks fan
than
a Maple Leafs fan. Matter of fact, I'm not a Maple Leafs fan at all.
Oh, okay.
I was a Detroit Red Wing fan years ago.
That makes sense.
With Gordie Howe and all those guys who were around many decades ago. But now I'm more of a Canuck fan, I guess, than anything else.
Yeah. How did you, you were around when Preston Manning, were you serving when Preston Manning was around?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the whole Wexit's Alberta Independence idea?
Well, it doesn't seem like it has real strong legs. There's a lot of people talking, but when you see the polls and you hear the results and so on, I'm not so sure that it has the strength there that's needed, right, in number. You need numbers to really bring this off. Yeah. And that doesn't seem to be there. So at this point, I think what all Canadians have to do is to try to rescue the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, bring it back to where it was. These lower courts cannot be allowed to get away with what they've done. They violated their own charter that they were supposed to defend. They haven't got a leg to stand on. They can't justify what they did. So we've got to bring this to the highest courts in the land. Now, if at the end of the day, the highest courts rule against us too, then I think we're into a real dilemma as a country. I think we're into a big dilemma now. Mm-hmm. It's going to be even bigger. Yeah. And there's people like me are not going to go away. I mean, there's 6 million Canadians who didn't get vaccinated. Right. We're not going away. And I think a lot of us want to see this. The worst criticism that could come against me and others and you and others is you didn't exhaust the present system. Right. Until you exhaust the present system, your credibility is not what it should be in order to look at alternatives. That's the other reason why I'm doing this. I've got to see this through to the end. If at the end it didn't work, and therefore the system is completely broken, okay, then I'm ready to look at alternatives. And I think that's when you will see some of the separation movements in Western Canada grow exponentially and be a real threat. Or, if not separation, a citizens' assembly of some sort from all over Canada, which comes together to say, you, present government, are illegitimate, right? And they have the numbers to bring about a sort of a quiet revolution of changing the whole structure of our nation and bringing back things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, bringing back the Parliament as supreme, not the Prime Minister's office, and other like things, right? Balanced budgets, right? Smaller government, individual freedom, and bring that in as a brand new governmental governance system and force the other existing systems to go by the wayside. But we're not there yet, and hopefully we never will, and that we can get the courts to readdress and realign the power structure in this country. But if at the end of the day that's impossible, then something must be done because our democracy will be gone.
Yeah, it's true. I saw you on Fox News back in January. Which is great. They did a great job covering the truckers. Were you in the National Post a few days ago, or is that a?
Yes, they finally carried a letter after 2 years. I've been sending them letters and they wouldn't carry any of them. And finally something must have happened. I don't know what it was, but they carried my response to Professor Ted Morton from Alberta, as a matter of fact,
Right.
who was denigrating the charter. And I wouldn't stand for that. And I never got my full letter in. They took out the part which said that Professor Morton had tried to do this back in 1991 in another column in the paper, the same paper.
Right.
And we showed him where it was wrong because I have the documents to prove it from back when the patriation happened. They didn't carry that part, or they didn't carry the part that it was in their paper that Professor Morton had done the same thing back in 91 that he was trying to do again today. But nevertheless, they did carry my arguments relating to what he had said. And I was grateful for that.
Yeah. Kind of seems that the current government likes to smear, obviously, anybody who's against them. Like, were you surprised at the methods and the reach that they took on the truckers and what they?
Well, I think I was surprised both in the degree to which the government would go, even though I knew they'd go pretty far because I had dealt with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin's father.
Right.
And I saw how far they'd gone and telling lies about me and the government of Newfoundland when we were fighting for offshore oil and gas. So I was aware of just how nasty they could be. But when the Conservatives said nothing and the NDP went with the Liberals,
yeah.
Right, when all of a sudden, and it's only now when the leadership convention comes up that we see the Conservatives suddenly coming around and are big heroes now
yeah.
of rights and freedoms, and they were nowhere to be found, including Jean Charest and Poilievre and all the rest of them who are now shouting from the rooftops. Where were they when the chips were really down? They were nowhere to be found. And Canadians got to remember that. So it's not only Trudeau.
Yeah.
It is the Conservative Party and the NDP Party and the Green Party. The Green Party are calling for an inquiry to find out how much white supremacy there is in the armed forces and in the Canada Borders Agency without one semblance of evidence to show, right? So all these parties are from the old school. They have all become very corrupt and very unresponsive to the person, to the citizen, to the taxpayer. That's why the PPC is so important now.
Yeah. Are you surprised at what Maxine's done since creating the party back in 2017?
Oh, I am. I mean, it's fantastic what he's been able to do, and the people like yourself and others who have joined the party and who are supporting him. And I think he's about to go on tour or is already touring the Maritimes right now,
right. Yeah.
Which is great to see. And I think that's very worthwhile. But if anybody, goes into the website and listens to the various podcasts he's done, I mean, nobody will carry him. It's like me not being carried in the last 2 years during the pandemic. I mean, here's a political leader that the mainstream press try to denigrate every chance they get. And yet he's been able to survive. And, kudos to him. And I'm right behind him.
Right. Do you think that Canada, and I guess do the American comparison again, do you think that Canada has a bigger problem with being regions that aren't united as maybe America?
I think it has a bigger problem. I think the Canadian government, we don't have an elected Senate or a Senate that has 2 senators from each state. The little tiny state of Connecticut, right, or Maryland or whatever, any of those small states, or even Massachusetts for that matter, has 2 senators in the Senate of the United States elected.
Right.
And big California and big New York only has 2. So that equalizes the regions, right? And therefore the big can't dominate like they do in Canada. And the Senate has power.
Right.
The Senate has real power, not just the House of Representatives. Everything has got to go to the House, to the Senate from the House of Representatives. They have real power over a lot of things. And so that means that the regionalism and the division through regionalism that would necessarily grow doesn't grow in the United States to the same extent it does in Canada, because the bigger provinces, right, without an elected Senate with equal representation from the small and the big, means the tyranny of the majority. And that's what's happened. And so Ontario and Quebec dominate the politics, the federal politics of Canada, more so than you would see New York and California do it in the United States. And so we need a full reform of our political institutions, our courts, our House of Commons, right, and all the rest of it. We want to reestablish real democracy. And we also, if we're going to have an upper house, then it must be elected and it must have power. Otherwise, you eliminate it and you have perhaps a council of the federation where the provinces meet and have power in one way or another, some other form, or no Senate at all. But then you'd have to redistribute the seats differently in order to make sure that the tyranny of the majority never always succeeded in getting their way. And the best way to do that is through an elected Senate, which has power.
Do you feel that one of the challenges in resisting government tyranny is to not get sidetracked by a lot of conspiracy theories? Because there's plenty about.
Over the last 3 or 4 months, and I'm glad you asked that question, I've spent more time putting out fires, which are, not fires at all, then you can shake the stick out. Every day it's 2 or 3 hours where I'm writing somebody back, explaining to them that the monarchy has no more power over our Constitution. That's why we did what we did in 1981-82. It was patriation, right, and other changes, plus the charter, right? And one of them was to say that when the 1982 Act is passed, the UK Parliament has no more power over the laws of Canada.
Right.
That's in Section 2 of the Canada Act 1982, which came just before the 1982 Constitution Act. They're all there together. And therefore, and that's right there for anybody to read. So I refer them to this, right? So they keep talking with the Governor General and the Queen still being in charge and all that. That is not true. And so the Canadians have over the especially last year or so, got preoccupied with people who are creating little organizations or internet venues which are perpetrating information which is untrue. And it hurts our cause because then we've got our eye off the ball and we're not looking at the real problem. That is changing our political system to make it work better than it's working right now because it's failing right now.
Do you think that our biggest enemy is cynicism or apathy?
I think it's a bit of cynicism, and I think there's a lack of knowledge. Every time I go to speak in person, and even online when community groups get the place is full, right? Over more there turn up than we can take in the building.
Right.
So there's an appetite to understand our Constitution a bit better. And a lot of Canadians will tell you, I am sorry and I regret that I have not paid attention, joined some political party, got involved in politics. I know it might be too late now, Brian, but I really, really regret that I haven't gotten more involved and understood the Constitution and understood the Charter. And so there's a great appetite out there, a great hunger to understand it better. But as we were trying to do that, and as I was trying to do that, there were too many who were still apathetic, number one, believing in the government as if the government could do no wrong, or did not take the time to read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or talk to somebody who knows something about it, or listen to different podcasts that make sense. Right. And so we've lost a lot of time in really being united on knowing that our real enemy, the governments of Canada, sadly, when they're supposed to be our protectors, they are our real enemies now because they are the enemies of the people, because they have shown their disregard for our rights and freedoms under the Constitution.
Do you feel that also with their politician? Do you feel one thing that puzzles me and a lot of people is why the RCMP have never charged Justin Trudeau with many infractions that seem as plain as day, and it's just a very they dropped the ball. How can people?
But this is the biggest problem with that is, and you're right. If the police were really independent, they would have charged quite a few people, but they have not. Yeah. And we had to go back. This started a long time ago when Jean Chrétien was prime minister. Okay, when he was prime minister, he was in Trudeau's cabinet for a while, Trudeau Senior's cabinet for a while, and then he became prime minister. He actually fired the head of the Federal Business Bank at that time, who was a Quebecer, Baudouin, his name was, because he refused to approve a loan for his friend in his constituency. And he fired him. Well, this guy had enough strength about him that he took that to court. And he won. And the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada had to reinstitute this man as the head of the FBD, the federal bank, if he wanted it, reestablish his salary for the time he lost, reestablish his pension. The Prime Minister of Canada had broken the law, had tried to destroy a person who was the head of a federal agency. So this business of the Prime Minister doing wrong started even before the present Prime Minister, and started with Jean Chrétien many, many years ago. And there are other examples of that. For example, Pierre, Justin Trudeau's father had a swimming pool built at Sussex Drive, and it didn't come from public funds, and nobody could find out where it came from. I put this in my book, and the silence has been deafening. So there's been a corruption within our system. And remember the big ad campaign back in Quebec, where tenders were given out free without tenders, right? And an inquiry was held and all the rest of them, how much wrong they had done. And so there's a lot of corruption that's been going on in Canada that a lot of Canadians have been ignoring for a long time. It's now coming to a head because this is so important as it relates to the Charter rights and freedoms and people dying, because of their delayed surgeries and so on. Right. And it took a health issue, right, of death to get people's attention, unfortunately. But our society and our political system in Canada has been deteriorating for about 5 decades.
Right. One last question. Do you find, I know that you do a lot of speeches at rallies and things, do you think that that's a great way for people to come together and show and try to wake other people up? No
question. No question. We've seen it in Victoria where, we've had up to 13,000 out just down the steps of the legislature in Victoria here on Vancouver Island. And there's another big one coming up on the 28th and 29th of May, which we will have tens of thousands there. And quite a few people from across the country, not just in British Columbia, are going to be coming to that. I'll be speaking there on the 29th in front of the legislature building. But if Canadians in every one of the capital cities were doing more of this on a regular basis, it cannot be ignored. The people have to see it, and the leaders have to see what's going on and know that there's a lot of resistance to what they're doing, like the bikers just did this past weekend. Right. But everybody's got to do that in all of the 14 capitals, the 3 territories, the 10 provinces, and in Ottawa and Toronto. Toronto, the province, and Ottawa, the national capital. If we were doing that more regularly, I think we would be further ahead now in changing things than we are. Canadians are passive, and they need to get more active. Yeah. Just because there are a few things off right now, they could come back on again in a jiffy.
For sure.
And meanwhile, our rights are still being violated as we speak. So we've got to keep the pressure on, and we've got to make these changes, because what will happen if we don't? And if we don't get the courts to change course on where we're going, the Charter rights and freedoms will mean nothing the next time this happens, because they'll just look at the precedent and what happened. And the courts will say, well, look at the precedent that happened in 22, 23. So, this is allowed. So our democracy is at stake here. And more Canadians got to understand that this is a very crucial time into whether we will remain free or not.
Right. Well, thanks very much for your time. I think that everybody's inspired, and I think the cool thing about PPC and the truckers and the bikers and everybody is that the diverse groups all across Canada and all feel the same and are uniting against the government that seems like their biggest aim is to divide us and conquer us and use medical experiment that's never been tried at this level before. And it's quite there's a lot of great Canadian heroes, and you're one of them, and we really want you to keep going and do our part. And hopefully I will get this out in a newsletter and as many people as possible, and you keep fighting, and we got your back.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. And you can be guaranteed and I shall not stop until I go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada if that's necessary.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, sir.
You have a great night.
And you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.